Broadcasting across California, you're watching The Issue Is.
And welcome to a very special edition of The Issue Is. I'm Elex Michaelson, and with us here on set during Super Bowl week is a guy who has broadcast 7 Super Bowls.
Is that the number?
29 Emmys. I think the greatest sports broadcaster of all time. Bob Costas here on set. Welcome back to The Issue Is.
You cannot say this in Southern California. The longtime base of operations of Vin Scully.
Well, yeah.
The best anyone else can do is take the silver.
Okay, that's fair.
You know?
I think of Vin just as in terms of baseball, although he did it all.
He did a lot of things.
He did it all. I think you more overall. And we hope that Al Michaels is watching. Okay, so let's start. It is Super Bowl week. You've been a part of so many Super Bowls, as has Al Michaels.
Yes.
Chiefs versus Eagles, your thoughts?
I think it's a heck of a matchup. The Eagles have a better team overall, but as good as Jalen Hurts is, Mahomes has the advantage there. So it would seem to me, lots of things can happen in a single game, but it would seem to me that if the Chiefs win this game, then Mahomes has to have a terrific game for that to happen.
Let's talk more broadly about the Super Bowl itself, because it has become a cultural experience unlike anything else in America. And at this time in America, we're all so divided. Everybody's looking at their phone all day, but yet over 100 million people watch this. What do you think that other sports can learn from what the NFL has done right in terms of building a massive live audience?
Actually, very little, because the nature of football and the way it's scheduled is to their enormous advantage. Your team plays once a week, generally on a weekend, generally during a time of the year when people are at home in much of the country where the weather isn't all that good. And most important, as you build toward the postseason, every playoff game in the NFL is the equivalent of a 7th game in baseball, basketball, or hockey. Football televises very well, if you can put the essential brutality of the game aside. And I think many people who cover it, many people who watch it, make some kind of deal in their own mind with it. They know the nature of it. They know what's happening, not just the specific things that happen on the field, but the attrition and the people who at age 50 won't remember where they left their keys or how to drive home or what their kids' names are. And that's not an exaggeration. Even the NFL now itself acknowledges that between 25 and 30% of those who play football for any period of time will have some sort of neurological or mental acuity difficulties down the road.
Are you watching football now that you don't have to watch it for a living? Does that bother you? Do you think about that?
Oh, it bothers me, and I made that clear. My ambivalence about it is why I'm no longer doing it. Now, I absolutely recognize the drama, the excitement, the strategy, the shared experience, the appeal of it. And many of the finest people I've met in sports have been football people, coaches, front office people, players. Will I watch the Super Bowl? Do I watch the playoff games? Yes. But this is an honest answer to your question. If you asked me most Mondays or Thursdays, who's playing tonight, I wouldn't know.
Meanwhile, a historic week in basketball, another sport that you covered closely for so many years.
And which I still love.
LeBron James becoming the all-time leading scorer in NBA history. Can you put that in some historical context? What does that record mean?
Well, it means a hell of a lot, especially because of the guy who held it, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who's one of the greatest players in history, almost by definition. You hold a record like that, you have to be among the greatest players in history. Is it another feather in LeBron's cap? It most certainly is. But by way of comparison, LeBron has won 1 season scoring title. Kareem won a handful. Michael Jordan won 10. It's so difficult to compare across eras.
Right.
When Michael Jordan played, and the reason we're talking about this is that it's come down to Jordan and LeBron in the argument.
Does LeBron breaking this record change your view at all about about Michael Jordan being the greatest ever?
No, I think it's another notch on the resume for LeBron, and he was already on the very short list of the greatest players who ever played in any era. I've always said this, though, and this has nothing to do with a statistical comparison. If we're just talking about basketball in a vacuum, you've got a LeBron-Jordan argument, and cases can be made for either. But if you're talking about the overall impact through no fault of LeBron's, that's Jordan in a runaway. Michael Jordan's impact on the game and on its popularity has something to do not only with his excellence, but his presence. He was an incredibly pleasing and compelling player to watch. Not that LeBron isn't, but there are degrees of things. And Jordan was at the highest level, occupied by only a very few in the history of sports, any sport. And I've taken to saying it this way. No little old lady in Omaha ever said, I'm sorry, Mildred, I can't play bridge with you tonight because I have to watch LeBron. A million little old ladies in Omaha said that about Michael Jordan, even though they didn't know, a three-pointer from a pick and roll.
And of course, there were so many fewer channels. There wasn't,
That's right.
There wasn't this.
That's right.
And all the other distractions that come with it as well. But one thing LeBron has done, I think that he deserves credit for, in a way that I think Michael Jordan never really did and never really cared to do, was his cultural impact in terms of helping the community.
Yes.
The ways he's invested in a local school in Ohio, the way that he's prioritized being a father in a very public way.
Yes.
The way that he's become a political activist and really advocated for the African American community. Can you talk about the comparison there and what that means for LeBron's legacy?
Yeah, Michael, in fairness to him, in the aftermath of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, pledged $100 million. But obviously, LeBron has been more outspoken. I think in his outspokenness, his intentions are uniformly good. But sometimes, no matter how much you respect and admire someone, you're allowed to disagree with them. And I think that some of the things LeBron has said or tweeted have been ill-considered or disproportionate. That doesn't mean that I disagree with the sentiment that motivated it, but sometimes I think he could be a little more precise about some of the things he says. And in the big picture, I admire him not just as a player, but as a person. I interviewed him 20 years ago on HBO. It was the first interview I think he had done on national television when he was just coming out of high school in Akron. He'd been drafted by the Cavaliers, but he hadn't played a game yet in the NBA. He's 18 years old, and I was deeply impressed by how mature he was, how level-headed he was. And one of my questions to him, which I thought was reasonable, was, how does it feel to know that if you're not a first-ranked Hall of Famer, an all-time great, not enough to become an all-star, if you're not a first-ranked Hall of Famer, a lot of people will say you were a bust. Well, it turned out that not only did he meet all those expectations, he exceeded them. And part of that is an expression of character, the way he's taken care of his body, the way he's lived his life. I think he is a genuinely good man, as well as a great basketball player, my occasional disagreements with his pronouncements notwithstanding.
Yeah. Coming up, big changes are coming to the rules of baseball. Bob Costas breaks them down and more next. We are talking with Bob Costas, one of the great sports broadcasters of all time. When we talk about sports, though, your ultimate passion is baseball.
Yes.
And baseball is going to have a lot of changes this year. There's going to be a pitch clock. There's going to be changes when it comes to the shift, which is where defensive players are allowed to stand out on the field. Do you think these changes are good?
Yes. Baseball is supposed to have a pleasing, leisurely pace. That's always been part of its appeal. There's no clock like other sports. Well, now there will be a pitch clock because it was necessary, but it has a pleasing, leisurely pace at its best. It's not supposed to have a plodding, lethargic pace, and that has too often been the case. So the pitch clock will help with that. The minors give us an idea. It won't be exactly the same in the majors, but when they put it in place in the minors, it sped games up by an average of like 25 minutes a game. Outlawing shifts, the reason why teams shift, and the Dodgers, by the way, were among the very best at that. Their analytics were elite. The reason why teams did it was because it worked, but it worked to thwart offense. You want the ball in play. You don't want as many strikeouts. Right now in baseball, the overall strikeout rate is roughly equal to Nolan Ryan's career strikeout rate. When there are more strikeouts overall in baseball than base hits, as there have been in the last few years, you've got a less appealing game.
You know, some Dodger fans are disappointed that they didn't do more in the offseason. Who do you think right now are the favorites in the National League and the American League to win the World Series next year?
I think the Dodgers are still the favorite to win their division. The Braves and the Mets are very strong in the East. The Cardinals are probably the best team in the Central Division. In the American League, the Astros, even though Verlander defected to the Mets, they're so deep and they're so good. Seattle in their division is trying to improve, and the Angels with Trout and Ohtani someday. You can't waste two of the greatest players ever on a team that never makes it to the postseason.
Get one playoff game in there.
Right. I mean, how the hell can Mike Trout, arguably over time the best player of his generation, be essentially unknown to people outside Angel territory?
Yeah, and that includes a lot of people in Southern California who focus on the Dodgers and don't really even focus on the Angels.
Maybe, yeah.
Still to come, Bob Costas on Tom Brady, the broadcaster. What's his advice? Goat to goat. We are talking with Bob Costas. We're talking about great broadcasters. Tom Brady is about to become a broadcaster. Going to start next year, 2024, going to give himself a year to decompress and also learn this. We know there have been so many great players who are not great broadcasters, and that's been a problem in the past. You've worked with so many people, including some at the start of this. What's your advice to him in terms of what he should do to study, to learn, to be better at actually being a broadcaster?
Well, first, before he starts, I'm very surprised that this Sunday, Fox is not using him on the Super Bowl. They can say to him, hey, Tom, you want to take a gap year? You want to start in 24? That's fine. But we have the Super Bowl, and you've played in 10 of them, and you're fresh off the field. We don't want you in the booth.
Right.
You know, Greg Olson has that covered with Kevin Burkhardt. But we had a 6-hour pregame show.
Sit next to Terry Bradshaw.
Right, and a halftime and a postgame.
Right.
You know, you're not going to increase the rating of the game, but you could probably increase the rating of the pregame, especially in the early hours before kickoff approaches, by having him there. I'm very surprised that they didn't insist upon that. But if he is intent...
They're not paying him enough money for that. Okay.
Yeah, right.
It's almost $400 million.
Right. Geez, Tom, for $400 million, could you give up a weekend? Could you come to Phoenix? We'll charter you in. Anyway, if he's intent, and I think that Tom's nature is, if he's going to do something, he's not going to do it without full commitment. I would say that he has to do some version of what he and Peyton Manning and the best at his position have done. They've got to study tape. They've got to look at it. They've got to figure out not just the points they want to make, but what's the pace and rhythm? Where do you get in and where do you get out? Watch the guys that are the best at it and see if this is what you really want to do. Without diminishing what happens on a pregame show, to prepare to do what Troy Aikman does or what Tony Romo does requires more work, requires more study.
Since we're talking about great broadcasters and learning from people, who would you say are the top 3 broadcasters you've worked with as maybe partners in the booth or people in the studio, other people?
I've been lucky. I've worked with some great people in the booth, and they were great for different reasons. The most fun was Bob Uecker, who still in his late 80s does the Brewers radio and sounds just the same as he did in the prime of his career. Mr. Baseball, you have to be of a certain generation to understand. He was on with Johnny Carson like 100 times.
And also in Major League.
Right, in the Major League movie.
Yeah.
I mean, a great dry sense of humor. And when he was in a 3-man booth with me and Joe Morgan, then the combination was right. I did basketball on NBC in the 90s with Doug Collins. And Doug, who was a terrific player himself, maybe is the best analyst in the history of the NBA. There are others, but he was really good. Plus, he's a good broadcaster. You can know a lot, but if you can't figure out how to express it concisely and get in and out, then it's not as effective. I'm leaving people out. In the studio, I loved working with Ahmad Rashad. And I think that Ahmad was underrated or underappreciated by television critics because they looked at it and said, well, he's not journalistic like Bob, or he's not like Jim McKay or Vin Scully or whatever the hell it is. Yeah, but he was great as Ahmad Rashad. And you should have been around him to see the way athletes responded to him. That is a quality. If I was starting a sports network and a staff, and you said you can hire 5 or 6 people, Ahmad Rashad would definitely, in his prime, definitely be one of them, because you just think of him on the sideline in the NBA, his relationship with Michael Jordan.
Right.
His job wasn't to be Mike Wallace asking him prosecutorial questions. His job was to engage Michael Jordan, and he did. And every other athlete responded to him in any sport in that way. Plus, he was so much fun.
Yeah.
We got each other, and I could set him up and throw a line his way. I just loved his company.
Up next, we have some fun. Bob Costas plays our personal issues game and more. Stay with us. We're with Bob Costas on the issue is we play a few games here on the show. These are quick fire things.
Yeah.
One of the games is called the name game, which is where we're going to just put up a name and then the first thing that comes to mind, sort of one word or a real short answer.
Keeping myself to one word is a challenge.
Well,
there's Al
as we've seen after. Okay, here we go. Al Michaels.
Mount Rushmore.
Vin Scully.
Top of Mount Rushmore.
Howard Cosell.
Howard Cosell in one word. Brilliant and obnoxious, depending upon the moment. Shall I tell you a Howard Cosell story that's very brief?
Afterwards. Let's go through this. Mike Tirico.
Excellent and versatile.
Yeah.
Excellent in so many different roles.
Basically, your successor at NBC. Kirk Gibson.
Most theatrical baseball moment I have ever witnessed and been part of.
Yeah, and that was part of our last show with Bob, which people should watch. Michael Phelps.
Most decorated Olympian. You can argue for others, but if it's just the most decorated, he's the guy.
Michael Jordan.
In my view, best basketball player ever.
And finally, Mickey Mantle.
Here's your answer.
Wow.
That's his 1958 baseball card. The first one I remember getting out of a pack of Topps bubblegum cards when I was 6 years old, growing up on Long Island, when Mickey Mantle was baseball. The Dodgers and Giants had left for the West Coast. The Mets didn't exist yet. The Yankees were the best team in the American League. Mickey Mantle was their glamour boy, Triple Crown winner, MVP. And later, as luck would have it, Mickey and I became very good friends subsequent to his playing career. And his family asked me to be among the eulogists at his funeral.
And widely regarded as one of the great eulogies of all time, Bob's words about Mickey Mantle as well. We do, Howard Cosell, your quick Howard Cosell story.
Okay, first time I met Howard, who, all kidding aside, I admired.
Right.
He
wasn't that nice to you,
He
right?
was brilliant at his best, and he was brave. He was journalistically brave. He stood up for Muhammad Ali. Eventually, everyone got it, but he got it early on. He took a lot of stances like that, rubbed people the wrong way, but I admired him. On the other hand, he could be a little overbearing. So the first time I run into him is at the 1983 World Series, Phillies against the Orioles in Baltimore at the old Memorial Stadium. And there's Howard Cosell. I'm a young broadcaster. I've just broken in at NBC. And there's Howard Cosell standing in the doorway of the broadcast booth where he's about to call the World Series with Al Michaels and Earl Weaver. And he's standing there in that hideous yellow ABC blazer, the toupee perched precariously atop his head. And he's wielding a cigar about half the size of a Louisville Slugger. So it's prototypical Howard Cosell. And I walk up, I say, Mr. Cosell, my name is Bob Costas. It's a pleasure to meet you. And he goes, I know who you are. You're the child who rhapsodizes about the infield fly rule. I'm sure you'll have a fine career. And he flicked the cigar ash and walked back into the booth. And for a split second, I'm thinking, this is the biggest schmuck I've ever met. But then in the next second, oh, no. I just got the full Howard Cosell treatment.
Yeah.
It's like Don Rickles, ripping you a new one. It's all good. I love it. And here it is 40 years later, I still have a story.
And a great talk show story, too.
Yeah.
All right, finally, to wrap things up, we play a game called Personal Issues. This is to get to know you a little bit better. We put 30 seconds up on the clock.
In 30 seconds, I can't cover all my personal issues.
Yeah, okay. So we start off with, what is your all-time favorite TV show?
As a kid, The Honeymooners, being objective, Seinfeld. Now,
What is
Curb Your Enthusiasm, kind of related.
All-time favorite musician?
It's tough. Springsteen, I guess.
Love Springsteen. Who's your favorite sports team?
You know, I don't have favorites now. As a national broadcaster, I'm as objective as I can be, but I was a Yankee fan growing up.
Do you have one favorite athlete?
Mickey Mantle.
And best place to relax?
You know, is that the bell that says
Well,
the 30 seconds are up?
Yeah.
You know, the best place to relax for me, I will not reveal the address, but I spend much of the year in New York, but we have a place in Orange County, which is right on the water, on the Pacific Coast Highway. And you and I have gotten together there, and it's pretty darn relaxing.
That's pretty nice. Bob, you are the best. I think you're the best that have ever done something like this, and we all love Vin Scully, the greatest of all time. To have you here on our set doing our little show means the absolute world.
You're a little show.
Yeah.
You realize that over the next 10 years, if you weren't already, you'll be way more significant than me.
No,
I'm on the back nine at about the 16th or 17th hole. And you're just reaching, you're not even at the turn yet.
Yeah.
And you've already scored several birdies.
Oh, well, thank you. We're all
Have
trying
I
to
strained that metaphor enough?
We're all trying to be more like you. It means the world to have you here. Thank you so much, Bob Costas, on The Issue Is. We really appreciate it. We end this week with one of my favorite songs of all time, Randy Newman's I Love L.A., in honor of LeBron James, because Mayor Karen Bass did something cool to recognize LeBron and Kareem as two L.A. legends this week, highlighting City Hall.
Right.
And it was all lit up in purple and gold this week.
You know, I'm glad that from the Randy Newman catalog, you selected I Love L.A. rather than Short People.
Leave it there. Bob Costas, the man, the myth, the legend. Thanks for watching The Issue Is. We'll see you next week.
We love it.